Hi guys, it's Ray here from City Fan TV, and I've got another special guest today. We've got Lee Wingate, all the way from, is it sunny Vienna? Can I say that?
It's really not sunny Vienna right now. It's pretty overcast at the moment.
All right. Guys, I'm going to ask Lee to tell us a little bit about himself and what he does over in Austria.
Yeah, so I'm a football translator and journalist, and about 2 years ago, me and a couple of other Brits based here in Vienna set up our own English language podcast about Austrian football. It's called The Other Bundesliga. We're on all the usual platforms for podcasts, Spotify, iTunes, and all that sort of stuff, and on social media at Other Bundesliga as well. And we basically follow the domestic league and the Austrian clubs in European competition as well.
Is there much demand for Austrian football talk?
We didn't think there would be at the start, but to be honest, you'd be surprised how much interest there is in niche European leagues, and especially a league like Austria, which really does act as a sort of breeding ground for younger players to develop and hone them. You know, the likes of Haaland, for example, Minamino. These players make a name for themselves in Austria and mostly with Salzburg, and then move on. So yeah, there is quite a lot of interest in some of the up and coming young talent here.
Yeah, well, the young talent we're here to talk about today is Patson Daka. Now, I'll be quite honest. Up till about 3 days ago, I'd never heard of the guy. You know, when City are linked with players, they're usually in two extremes. One is the really expensive, almost final products, and then we're linked with a whole host of kids, teenagers up to the age of 18, 19, who generally will come and we'll keep them for a couple of seasons in the academy, and then we'll sell them or loan them out and then sell them. And some, I think there's a kid called Enis Ünal. I don't think he ever came to City. We bought him from Turkey for about €2 million, sent him off on loan, and a season later we'd sold him for about 10 or 12 million. So that's the kind of way City do things. So that's one of the reasons that Patson Daka, because he's already 22 years old, hadn't really come onto my radar. So can you tell us a little bit of background about the kid, please?
Yeah, sure. So he's from Zambia, which I guess isn't traditionally a country that produces that many big name players. But Salzburg have an incredible recruitment system in Africa. They've got their tentacles everywhere. They're always on the lookout for young talent in sort of countries that aren't traditionally providing them. Mali, for example, Zambia as well. And they spotted Patson Daka, I think, at an under-20 national team tournament back in 2016. Offered him a 6-month trial on the basis of that. So he came over to Salzburg. That was a really big adaptation for him, quite mentally challenging. You know, he's coming from a very sunny climate to suddenly a very snowy and cold Austria. And he initially struggled, to be quite honest, but over time he persevered. He's a very persistent young player, and he's now pretty much become a key component of their front line, especially after the departure of Erling Haaland to Borussia Dortmund last season. Everyone here was wondering, what are Salzburg going to be like without Erling Haaland? And the answer is pretty much all right, because they've got Patson Daka, a very dynamic young striker who scored 24 goals in the Austrian Bundesliga last season. His tallies are improving year on year, and he's starting to attract some attention of some big clubs now, which I guess is why I'm talking to you today.
Absolutely. I mean, as you say, Austria and Salzburg are a good breeding ground for young talent. I mean, Liverpool, didn't they get a chat from you guys as well? Was it Minamino?
Yeah, Takumi Minamino. Yeah. And I think, you know, given the current corona crisis and the fact these clubs don't have much money, buying players from Austria right now is a sensible solution. Because if you look at the example of Takumi Minamino, everyone's saying he's a bargain. He cost Liverpool €8 million. But Salzburg bought him for 800,000. So they've made a tenfold profit on him, essentially. And, you know, as well, Erling Haaland went for around 20 million. The record transfer fee for a player bought from Austria is €32 million, I believe. And that was for Naby Keita, I think, back in, what would that been, 2016 or so. So the transfer fees are generally lower here. And, you know, that's why players are a good option, frankly, right now, given the financial situation for many football clubs in Europe.
Yeah, let's move on to talk a little bit about Patson Daka in more detail. Then, I mean, obviously, I've only watched him on YouTube. You've watched a little bit more than him than I have. But what are his key attributes? Why are City interested in him?
So very, very, very fast, very, very intelligent, very, very strong. I think an unusual attribute for strikers as well is genuine two-footedness. So if you look at some of his shooting statistics from last season, I think over around, I think it was 36% of his goals were scored with his weaker left foot, and 40 or 45 with his right foot, and the rest were headers. So he's got a genuine two-footedness as well. And he's just very intelligent with his runs and his movement. So he's always sort of moving into half spaces to sort of either offer a passing option to his midfielders or just to create space for the other players. And I'd say, last but not least, he's very cool in front of goal, very, very composed, doesn't really seem to feel the pressure. So I think there's a lot of attributes there that have really improved over the years. And just to give you an extra statistic there to show you really what kind of prolific forward he is. I think he outscored his XG by 12 goals last season. So I think he scored, 32 goals in all competitions, and I think his XG was around 20 or 21. So this is a guy who is really starting to attract attention beyond Austria's borders, and understandably so, I think.
Yeah, I think with the goals I've seen him score, you can't pick a standard goal because he pretty much does everything. I've seen him dribble, I've seen him steal balls from a defender when the defender thinks he's got the ball. The defender thinks I'm in control here. The ball's just coming to me, and he's just so quick that he nicks the ball away, and he's pretty direct as well. It's like he can do everything, and he like you say, he's cool in front of goal. What do you think his key moments in his career have been then?
I'd say probably one of the biggest key moments was, I think, might have been that under-20 African Cup of Nations, because this was a point that Salzburg were having some doubts about whether he would really make it, whether he'd really cut it in Austria. And I think at that tournament, he was the player of the competition, the top scorer, and Zambia won it. So it was pretty much about as good as it gets. And I think at that point, they decided to keep him. And from there on, it's been, he's gone from strength to strength. So I think that was definitely a turning point in his career. He's overcome a lot of adversity. He lost his father, who he was very close to and who really got him into football and accompanied him everywhere in his early life. So I think that's a sign of his sort of mental toughness to cope on another continent as well. In terms of actually on the football pitch, last season, he became the first Zambian player ever to score in the Champions League. I think that was against Genk of Belgium. So recently there've been lots of them, and this season again, he's top of the Austrian Bundesliga scoring charts with 6 goals in 5 games. He's going to miss the next few months actually due to injury. I'm not sure if you knew about that, but so in the game against Atletico Madrid on Tuesday, he's never really. He's one of these players that doesn't really seem to pick up injuries. So I think this is probably a first for him, but he sustained quite a serious hamstring tear, and he's now expected to miss the rest of the group stages and potentially not play again until 2021, which is a huge blow for him personally and for Salzburg.
Yeah, now you mention it, last night I was doing a live stream and someone said he was injured, and it slipped my mind. But that actually really affects some of the next points I was going to make, because obviously we've got no strikers at the moment. Ours are injured. Aguero was out for 4 months. He came back. He played 3 half games. We're bringing him in a bit slowly, and he's got injured again. He's going to be out for possibly another month. He's 32, and we're worried that, obviously we can see the decline anyway. He's not as fast. He's not as explosive. He can't sustain a burst of speed, and he doesn't want to chase around as much as he used to. And obviously, Gabriel Jesus is out, and some of us were thinking, could we actually go for this guy in January? Because of, if Aguero continues to have problems, we can't really go through a season with just Gabriel Jesus, who for most of us he's not a natural goal scorer. He's a very hard worker, and he brings a lot to the team, but not enough goals to satisfy the City faithful. So that kind of, the fact that he's Patson Daka's injured probably takes the January option off the table, and that might make City look somewhere else. I mean, there are other people out there, but not many that I've seen with his level of skill and goal scoring and all-round team play for what we think the money might be. So let's just suggest that when he does come back and he gets back into a similar level of form as to what he displayed beforehand, where do you think he would leave next summer, and where do you think he might go?
I think when you get players of his caliber, there are a couple of others at Salzburg too right now. Dominik Szoboszlai, who's been linked with Arsenal and AC Milan and lots of other clubs. And last season, Haaland and Minamino. When you get players of this caliber, you realise that it's great to watch them in Austria, but that we're not going to keep them here forever. It's just a fact. This is sort of part of the food chain of football, and players tend to move on to Germany or England or other countries like that. And I can pretty much envisage that this season would be his last in Salzburg, because he's not a teenager anymore. He's 22 now, like you said. And I think that he'll probably want to take the next step. So I think he probably will leave at the end of the season. Because of the injury, I think a January move, like you say, is quite unlikely. But the end of the season is what I'd probably imagine for him. In terms of where he would go, you probably know this, but it's a path well trodden to move from Salzburg to Leipzig because of the Red Bull connection. Something around 20 players have made that move over the past 7 or 8 years. So I think that the Leipzig would probably take a good look at him. In terms of the Premier League, I actually think that he'd probably suit a team that plays really fast, sort of like Liverpool's game. I think he might be a better fit for Liverpool, because one thing I noticed, I don't watch too much of Man City, but when I do watch them, it's sort of this intricate passing play. And all of it's so great to watch, all of this link-up play. But Patson Daka is very much a sort of latching onto vertical balls, breaking through the lines, bursts of pace. Maybe he would fit City. I couldn't say definitively, but somehow just City didn't come to mind immediately when I thought about who he would suit. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, when I've seen him on YouTube, he reminds me of Sadio Mane. Just the way he plays. Obviously, that explosive burst of pace. He looks a bit wiry. He moves very, very comfortably. The way he dribbles, the way he gets past people, he's not afraid of anything. I'm trying to think how he would fit into City. The way I look at it, City are very slow. Sometimes we take a very ponderous build-up, but we're just looking for those gaps. We're not that as direct as Liverpool, and we don't bypass our midfield too much and put it into the channels for someone to chase. We are looking for that build-up. But I could see him as a striker, or as a mix between Gabriel Jesus and Sergio Aguero, because Gabriel Jesus, he's the one you can see making all those runs, putting a lot of effort in, but he can't score as consistently as Aguero, and that's Aguero's forte. So I'd see, Patson Daka, he could, for me anyway, possibly play across anywhere on the front line. Maybe I don't know if he'd get bored not getting the ball enough, and at City, whereas at Liverpool he'd have a lot more to chase. At City, when he gets the ball, he'll have 1 or 2 men on him if he's playing out wide, and up front, obviously the 2 centre backs. But he's an interest, and I can't remember where I saw that City were linked with him. But obviously, there's one important thing: is what would he cost? Because even City are saying that we didn't buy a striker in the summer. We had a quick look, but we couldn't afford it, because City, despite what so many fans and pundits say, we're not throwing money at the project. Sheikh Mansour doesn't give us any money anymore. Basically, we are self-sustaining, so whatever we earn, we can spend. So what would he cost? City might only have 20 or 30 million pounds to spend.
I mean, given that Haaland went for 20 million and just the finances are different here. You don't get players sold for over 20 million in Austria. It's a very, very, very rare occurrence. There's been 1 or 2. So I don't think that, if City or any other club were to bid for Patson Daka, they wouldn't need to necessarily blow Salzburg out of the water. Because as well, I think one of the ways that Salzburg attract a lot of these young players is that they promise to to develop them and to give them a good platform to shine, but also that they won't stand in their way when inevitably a good opportunity comes along. And so I don't really think he would cost that much. Given the current financial climate, it's probably a sensible option to look towards a player like him, because it's risk mitigation as well. If it doesn't work out, then you haven't spent so much money on him. I wouldn't be surprised if Salzburg were prepared to sell him for 25 million euro. That would represent very good business to them.
Yeah, I mean, my feeling is they've seen what happened with Haaland. Everybody knows what's happened with Haaland, and people and clubs will look for the next big thing. And if they think Patson Daka could be the next big thing, obviously that gives them a little wriggle room to ask for more than what they got for Haaland. Because as I think I said to you earlier, if Haaland had been sold in the summer and we didn't have the COVID issue, I think clubs would have been lining up to pay 50 or 60 million euros for him. And that's only 6 months after he joined Dortmund. So I think his explosive development, and people can see, he's gone from the Austrian Bundesliga to the German Bundesliga, and that's not slowed him down. In fact, he's on a bigger stage now. Going back a little bit, talking about where he might go, would you, if you were his agent, if you were suggesting where he should go, do you think he should go via the German Bundesliga route? Partly because he probably speaks a language. I don't know if he can what his English would be like, or his Spanish if he was to go to Spain. Would you advise him to go down the Bundesliga route and see what happens there before looking anywhere else, or if he makes it there, staying there?
I think when you look at the English Premier League, there's such a wealth of talent at the big clubs, and you look at the City players in the attacking department, and it's a star-studded lineup. I would be perhaps slightly cautious, slightly worried that he wouldn't get the playing time he needs to develop, because although he is 22, there is still room for improvement. He's still a work in progress. I might perhaps be slightly cautious if I was his agent, that a move to a club like City, who have so many options, that he might not play as much as he necessarily needs to. It would obviously be a huge move for his career. It would really throw him into the spotlight, but it might be, a bit too much too soon, perhaps, because you have to remember that the Austrian Bundesliga, despite its recent improvement, is still the 10th or 12th best league in Europe, something like that, according to the UEFA rankings. And it's a big step up to move to the best domestic league in the world. And I'm not sure that he would settle immediately. And if City need goal scoring options immediately, I'm not sure he is the one to provide them immediately. But if they're looking for a talented player who they could incorporate in their squad and over time would probably bring them rewards and goals, I think he would be a good bet. Again, it just depends what City's direct needs are.
Yeah, I mean, I think right now City, depends who you talk to, but I would say City need one or two midfielders, which sounds crazy, but I think obviously the loss of David Silva. Sometimes we've got nobody there who is as creative as David Silva. You had David Silva and KDB, two of the best in the business. You lose one of them, KDB still doing remarkable things, but nobody else can step up. Foden's not the same player to step up into that role. And I think I'm not sure what will happen to Riyad Mahrez this season, whether he'd want to leave. There have been rumblings and rumours. And City do need a striker, and we could do with another winger. I think right now we've got Sterling, Mahrez, and Ferran Torres, and that's really it. We've got a load of kids coming through who probably will get nowhere. So I could see him either playing out wide or up front, because of Aguero. You just can't, you just don't know where Aguero's going. But then once again, if City go down the route and get Messi next summer, which probably looks a bit less likely than it was a few months ago, then there's no space for anybody to develop, really, because Messi just kind of runs the show. And then I think it's not a good option to come to City. But I can understand the interest in him because he's an exciting talent. But I'm like you, I would be concerned that he wouldn't get the game time that he needs to keep on developing. Yeah,
I mean, if you look at as well at the example of Jadon Sancho, I know this is highly publicised that he, is a talented young player, and for whatever reason he didn't really get his chance at City, and he's gone to shine elsewhere. these young players need playing time. And obviously Sancho is younger than Patson Daka is now, and Daka is at a more advanced stage of his career slightly. But these young players, they need playing time. And the English Premier League, the demands are ferocious and the results need to be instant. And if you're a striker, you need to be scoring goals. So I think he needs to be eased into it. So if I were his agent, I'd probably be advising him to perhaps go to Leipzig or to a German club first. So it's a similar style of play in Austria and Germany. And then perhaps he could think about the Premier League further down the line. But, and I think 2020 has proven that in the world, generally, anything can happen. And in football, anything can happen. So there'll definitely be stranger things than Patson Daka moving to Man City.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think you mentioned Sancho. I think Sancho could see in front of him, we had, at the time, I think we had Sane and Sterling on the wings, and we were looking at Alexis Sanchez as well. Where does that leave someone like Sancho? You're not going to play. If City have got 3 world-class wingers, where does he play? And we've got Aguero up front. And I think we probably had Gabriel Jesus at that time. Where does Sancho fit in? And you're right, they won't develop. And that's always been my concern when City buy young players who look incredible. We had Brahim Diaz. He couldn't get into the team. He ended up leaving, going to Madrid, and now he's at AC Milan. And he looks like he's actually fulfilling the promise that we could see when he was about 18 years old, 17, 18, or whenever he came to City. And I think that's the issue with Patson Daka. Comes to City, it might take him a couple of seasons to establish himself at City if Aguero sticks around, if Messi comes or whatever. And that could, as you say, hinder his development, and he could just end up being another one of those players who could have made it, but might have to leave to re-establish his career. And I don't think that's good of him. But it's still really interesting to talk about his qualities and see how he would fit in and why he would fit in. Yeah,
and this is a slightly different note, but I'm not sure you're aware of this. There is actually a link at the moment between Manchester City and Austrian football, because there's a player on the books at Manchester City who's on loan at Austria Vienna here in the Bundesliga, and that's Eric Palmer-Brown, an American centre-back. He actually probably only featured for your under-23 team, but he's come over here and he's on his second season on loan in Vienna. So, wouldn't be the first move between between Manchester City and an Austrian club.
Well, City are crazy. We have so many kids out on loan, and now the City Football Group are buying players as well. So the company that owns Manchester City, they're buying players and then loaning them out as well. And then I think they'll just decide which club they will end up at eventually. And if they are good enough, they'll come to City. So it's really difficult to keep on top of all the players we've got and where they are these days. And it just seems every year it becomes increasingly more difficult. Yeah, I'd heard of Eric, but I couldn't tell you too much about him, because you're trying to. I think I'm of the firm belief that when a player leaves City to go out on loan, that's it. That's their career at City finished. There's pretty much hardly anybody that comes back. Zach Steffen, he went out on loan. But that's a kind of different tale, because he's not even been at City. We bought him and sent him out on loan to the Bundesliga, and now he's back. But pretty much nobody. I'm just trying to quickly think. I can't think of anybody in the recent past that's made a successful been out on loan. Angelino did. He went out on loan, but then we sold him and he came back. So they don't kind of fit into that category. There's none of these players like Harry Kane at Spurs, who went out on loan 2 or 3 times and then has come back and made it. City aren't like that. So it's always a worry for me, for kids. Once you leave, you're never coming back to make it at City, which is a shame. Yeah. Right, got to say massive thanks to Lee. The amount of information you've given us is fantastic. I think I've got to say there's very few people out there who will give you that level of information and do it in English as well.
No, you're welcome. It's always interesting to talk about some of these promising young talents and the big clubs they might end up at. So pleasure to join you.
Yeah. Just to finish off, is there anybody else out there that you think, this kid could make it?
Yeah, I'd say at the moment there are 2 Salzburg players that are head and shoulders of everybody else. One of them is Patson Daka. The other one is Dominik Szoboszlai. So anyone that saw the Atletico Madrid game in the week, they'll have seen Szoboszlai score a pretty decent goal in that game. He's kind of, he reminds me a bit in terms of his set pieces and deliveries of David Beckham, actually, just in terms of the quality of delivery. He scores a lot of free kicks, a lot of spectacular strikes. And he really was a player that about a year ago in the Liverpool game, so Salzburg lost 4-3 at Anfield, and he was the guy that allowed Mo Salah to score the winning goal. He made the mistake in the build-up. And since then, his development, he's really skyrocketed. And I think he really came into his own after the lockdown here in Austria in around May, June time. And this season, he's really, come on leaps and bounds as well. And we expect him to leave at the end of the season. So I think you'll hear about him. He's a Hungarian international, and I think a fair few clubs will be coveting his signature as well.
Yeah, I'm about to go onto YouTube and look at him, because actually I spoke to another analyst this morning and he mentioned him as well. He said, talked him up as well. So, my head's going to explode with watching YouTube videos of players playing in Austria at the moment. But I've got to say, finally, once again, massive thanks to you, Lee. And, hopefully we can do this again when somebody else comes on the radar.
Sure, we'll be happy to.